Howdy, and welcome to the Museum of Aquarium and Pet History. This is our third video, and this one is going to be on the Table of Wonder and Amazing, which is a 5 by 6 foot table that basically has some of the nicest pet items in the museum, some of my favorite items in the museum. So I could tell you about them, but I think I'd rather just show them to you. So without further ado, let's go. So here is the Hendryx illusion bird cage with the bowl off of it. So you could see the perch, you could see the little seed feeder cup, and here we have a fake little porcelain bird, canary bird. And they would have flown up here to get the seed, and the bowl would have been on top. And here is the bowl, and you could see it's probably one piece blown. It doesn't look like it's two bowls. Incredibly difficult to make this bowl. None of these cages had the original bowls. I actually had to take an original ad and I had to blow it up based on the size of the cage, and then I had to figure out the dimensions of the bowl. I found a scientific glass blower, and it took them about a year, not solid work, but it took them a year before I got my order finished, which was 3 of these bowls, each one costing $1,000 each. So they're not cheap. Nobody can make these. It's almost impossible. In fact, the scientific glass blower is now out of business, so it's kind of a shame if they break. That's the end of it. But you can see how they fit right on top into this cradle. And then you could see again the bird inside, and then you fill it with water, and you have, the illusion of the bird being underwater hanging out with the fish, with the goldfish. And the cage itself is spectacular. You've got little pigeon finials, you've got faces, carnival faces coming down on the cage. You've got other finials down here. The cage is mostly zinc, is what it's made of. And Hendryx made these cages from about 1860, 1870 on up to about 1910. And Oliver Lindemann also made a cage like this, and his was more like a little castle. And over here we have an Oliver Lindemann, or O.L. Lindemann as they're usually referred to, one of his cages. I call it the castle cage. It's got the little turrets. It's got the typical Lindemann door with the little filigree on top of it. That's pretty characteristic of Lindemann cages. And I don't have a perch or anything on the inside. The cage didn't have that. But this is the only example of a Lindemann cage that has the illusion feature with the fishbowl on top. I've never seen another example. And the Hendryx cage, we have 3 of them in the museum. They're painted, all 3 are painted different colors, and that's the only 3 that I've seen. The only other ones that I've seen have been in museums, and they've been even older. They've been actually folk art wooden cages that have had the double blown fishbowl on them, probably made in Europe, and that's probably where Hendryx got the idea, was from a European cage company. This is a Melox Dog Food display. This was something that would have been in like a pet shop that basically was a really good customer of Melox. They probably made these originally for their trade show booth at the trade shows that they exhibited in. I doubt very many of these were made. This is the only one I've ever seen. I bought this in England, and when they were shipping it, of course, it came broken, shattered in a zillion pieces, so I had to have a local artist friend actually put it back together. But it is a really unusual piece because it's not porcelain. It's actually some kind of material that's probably a bisque type material here that they did. Very crudely made is what I'm trying to say. But it's an interesting piece and very rare. This is animatronics. So in other words, it is a dog that actually moves. Let me turn them on. Spillers was the General Mills of England. They were a flour company, grain processor, and they made Spiller's Dog Food. Spratz was the very first commercial dog food company. Spillers came after them, founded by Joel Spiller in 1829. Again, they didn't really make dog food till about 1907, and they eventually bought out Spratz, and then of course they were bought out by Nestle, in 1998. But this, I have a picture of one of these dogs in their trade show booth in England at a trade show, probably in about the 1940s. Interesting story, I bought 2 of these and they came in and I didn't have a place to put them and I wasn't in a hurry to open the box, so I left the box sealed for probably about 10 years until I found it again and said, oh my gosh, here's those 2 animatronic dogs. And I opened it up and I pulled the first one out and he didn't have the little jacket. I pulled the second one out and he had the Spiller's jacket on. And I was so excited because it really was the providence that you needed. He was a dog food company point of purchase item. He was an animatronic dog made for Spillers. And it was made for their trade show booth, but they probably gave it to some of their better accounts. One of them that I bought another one years later, and they said it barked. And so I gave it to a friend of mine who did open heart surgery to see whether or not the dog actually barked or not. And no, the dog had no speaker, so it didn't bark. So that just goes to show you that some of the auction houses like to use a lot of poetic license and embellish a bit. So these don't bark, they just open their mouth and wag their tail. So this is a Grassyfork store use tank, display tank. This is something the Grassyfork would have given some of their better customers to put on their counter to basically display their goldfish, display what they would have sold at their farm. It could have displayed some of their fancier shabunkins or fantails or black moors, or it could have displayed feeder goldfish like you have here. When I was a kid working in a pet shop, we sold lots of feeder goldfish. You know, 12 for $1. People would come in and feed them to their Oscar fish, you know, their big cichlids, that kind of thing. But this is an amazing company. Again, started in the 1890s, was the largest goldfish producer for many years. Had a lot of competition in the 30s and 40s. And I think they wound down in the 50s and sold out to Ozark Fisheries in the 1970s. And Ozark still uses the Grassyfork ponds and the Grassyfork locations. I mean, they bought it out. So they still have quite a history of their own, actually. And that's Grassyfork. There's only 2 of these. We went out to the location of where they're at in Indiana, and we met up with some people that actually knew some other people, called them, met a guy who worked at Grassyfork in the day, and he had 2 of these in his garage, or garage if you're from England, and we managed to get one of them. So this is a Winalot animatronic dog food display. Probably, again, these were for a trade show booth, and then they gave them to some of their better accounts. Winalot was made by Spillers for racing greyhounds, and they realized that everybody wanted this dog food for racing greyhounds because it must be a special type of dog food. So 3 years after they introduced it in 1927, it was their best-selling dog food. So that's the story of Winalot. It was really made for racing greyhounds, and then it turned into a good seller for them. And this is one of their animatronic displays that I've never seen another one. So this is a Victorian-era self-acting fountain. These are extremely rare. They don't work off of electricity because they really didn't have houses hooked up to electricity back when they made these fountains around 1875 in that era. Some of them were made for putting fish in, but they were self-acting, which means that they actually had a fountain feature that worked mechanically or in a different way and not by using electricity, by having a pump. This particular one, which I'll show you, has this gigantic plunger. It's very, very heavy, and the plunger goes in like so, and we just start it, and there you go. So can you see the water?
Yeah.
So there you go. And nothing propels that fountain except just the weight going down into this cylinder right here. And just the force of gravity pushes this up. And what people would do is put perfume in these too, and you would the room would smell nice. You'd have a perfumed room. They would put these in the parlor. They would put these in buildings, like in in commercial buildings in the front. In fact, I think this one was more of a commercial type one because they had more delicate ones that were made totally of glass by Tufts. There's a museum that has some Tufts self-acting fountains that work off of a bellows system where you just spin the bellows around and the force of the water will actually make the fountain. What's cool about this one is that it'll take half hour to an hour before the thing is completely gone to the bottom, and then you just take a tool, this one here, and you basically just lift it back up like that. But it's really, really neat. You just got to start it and make sure that it's in the middle so you don't get everything wet. But you can see how high it's shooting the water all the way up to here. And that's just strictly from the weight of the bellows pushing down on the water. And it will take, I would say, at least a half hour before the plunger's gone to the bottom and it stops doing that. That's called a self-acting fountain. When I got this, it didn't have the bowl. The bowl was broken. And I used the same glass guy that did the double blown fish bowls to actually recreate the bowl based on the shape of the one that was broken on the bottom. Again, it took a long time to make the bowl and it was not cheap, but at least we saved it. And when I first bought it, it came from a picker who said it was a fish bowl, and I didn't really believe her. And then finally, after doing some research, I found it was a self-acting fountain, and I thought, oh, that's really cool. So that's what you have. You have something that's just really unusual. And again, they would have put perfume in these as well. Either goldfish or they would put perfume in them, and they put them in a room to make it smell nice. Pretty cool. Self-acting fountain. This is Hendryx fountain bird cage, and it's the only example that I've ever seen. It's a bird cage that actually has a fountain inside of it and had a small little motor that actually ran the fountain. It's a crazy idea because how do you clean the fountain? You know, the bird's going to make a mess in it almost immediately. So this is probably a very novel thing that they made for a trade show to show that they had the ability to make just about anything. Cage is pretty spectacular. You've got faces looking down. You've got little eagles on top. So you've got like a little fence that goes around the cage, stairs going up to the door that goes into the cage. And then you've got this crazy fountain. And we hooked it up to a rheostat so we can make the water go almost any level. And it also has a little turret on the top with a little American flag. Again, a very, very rare cage. I've only seen this example of it. It was a crazy idea that they probably made very few of these for just display to show, hey, we have the capability of doing anything, making any kind of cage. And they probably used this at a trade show and then discontinued it a year later. So I don't think that this cage was on the market for not even a year, which is why none of them survived. The date of this cage, I think it's late 1800s to early 1900s. Again, this was made by Hendryx. So these are Sargent's pet products. They've been around since right about the turn of the 20th century, 1902, 1903. They were originally called Polk-Miller, and Sargent was named after his dog, a German Shepherd. You could see these were 1960s. These went to some of their better accounts, and they all had this motion device in the back, this little magnetic bipolar or magnetic drive the dog is scratching, the dog is wagging his tail, the Dalmatian. The Cocker Spaniels are kind of showing you the before and after. Poor guy's got fleas. Now his fleas are gone. This Cocker Spaniel is scratching his fleas. So it's really neat because they don't make these anymore. You just don't see them. And these were what's called new old stock. So these were found in a warehouse and were never used. When we got them, none of the little magnetic devices worked on the back. They had to be cleaned and filed and everything else, and then we finally got them to work. So whenever you purchase things like this, you always have to take the risk that they may not work. And you need somebody that's very mechanically inclined that can actually fix things like this. But they're really cool, and I've tried to find some of the products to put on here to basically show what Sargent sold. They had a long run. I think they're actually still in business. They've been bought and sold a couple of times. But in fact, you can see, here's one of the original packaging of Sargent's. That's some of the older packaging from 1930s, 1940s. There we go. Heavy. Hopefully in the Victorian era the table is lower and they get a little bit of a grip on it. You know, it's all about the shot.
Okay.
Oh, there's a goldfish. The goldfish aren't very... Andrew, there's one that's not very...
Wash for dogs.
I've never seen that. And my dog, actually, because Jasper has really terrible breath, I've been brushing his teeth, but it's really hard. Look at the bird through the fish, because that's the whole illusion.
That's some tricky work.
One more time.
Okay, James Spratt invented the very first dog food in 1860, and it was made from tack, which was grain mixed with vegetables and beetroot and a bunch of other nasty things.